one thing that people need to keep in mind is there's 3 macronutrients. So all the food that you eat, with the exception of alcohol, you could count that maybe as a 4th, ethanol, will break down into one of 3 things. It's going to be fat, it's going to be carbohydrates, or it's going to be protein. And so if you're eating a food that is lower in one of those, in order for you to get the same amount of calories, your diet needs to be higher in the other things. So if we talked last week about a low carb diet. If you're on a low carb diet, you're de facto on a high protein, high fat diet. If you're on a low fat diet, you're de facto on a higher carb and hopefully higher protein diet if you're conscientious about it. But a lot of times people are not conscientious about the high protein aspect of the diet, because a lot of times the people who follow low fat are also following, basic dietary guidelines passed down by the USDA, by the World Health Organization. So they're not eating it's not like they're eating low fat food and a lot of chicken and a lot of seafood. They're eating low fat products that are going to tend to be carb heavy. So what most applications of a low fat diet is a high carb diet. And so you have to ask yourself, if you're functionally transitioning into a high carb diet, what's that likely to do? And as we discussed previously about carbohydrates, is a lot of people will eat carbohydrates and get hungrier from them. And so if you are not tracking your calories, which I think should be everybody's end goal, if they can do it, to eat intuitively, so they're not constantly weighing and measuring things, just eating to a satiation point and then stopping, you are going to be hungrier more of the time. And you have one of 2 choices when you're hungry. You either eat to satiate that hunger, or you don't eat, in which case it will likely compound at some point, and you might crash on your diet, fall off the wagon, as people say it, because your body is just itching to eat all of these macronutrients that it hasn't eaten for the last few months. And so, one of the important things for people who are trying to lose fat, really, or anybody, is to eat satiating food. Because if you're eating satiating food, you're probably not going to eat as much of it from a calorie standpoint. And it's really hard, as you mentioned earlier, to eat satiating food when it's low fat. The other thing to keep in mind about these products is, we prefer eating foods as close to their natural form, with minimal, corporate processing as possible. Well, guess what? Like, these foods don't naturally come low fat. They need to process it in some way. And, usually if you're going to get in the processing game, you're not just going to remove the fat. You're going to remove the fat. You're going to add sugar. Your buyers are going to be more okay with, certain processed additives, particularly if the label's nice and green. It's organic expeller pressed canola oil, or some sort of like fluffy word that doesn't really mean anything and doesn't really change the underlying properties of the food that you're consuming.